Hello, thank you for watching my video. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe and also leave a comment below. Don't forget to check out the description where you'll find a couple of links that I have mentioned during the video. This is my second video this week on a prominent Anglo-Saxon woman. The first being on Athelflaed, the Lady of the Mercians. The link to her video you can find in the description below. Athelflaed made a tremendous impact on Anglo-Saxon history, but the subject of this video, a woman by the name of Elfrida, did no such thing. Her impact was altogether different. She was a wife to a king, stepmother to another, and thanks to her own selfish actions, made herself the mother of a king as well. This is the story of an evil stepmother in 10th century England. Probably born in the mid-940s, Elfrida was the daughter of a Wessex nobleman. She became the third wife of King Edgar the Peaceful. Through his first two marriages, Edgar had two children, a son and a daughter. The son was named Edward, who was born around 962, and it would be he who'd be martyred at the hands of Elfrida in 978, when he was just 16 years old. His father is known as the Peaceful. In a century full of difficulties, Edgar's reign was notably stable. You can also find a link to a video on Edgar that I have done in the description below for further information on his reign. After Edgar died, thoughts of peace and prosperity would be long gone in England. Elfrida had played a reasonably significant role during the reign of Edgar. She helped oversee legal matters and that justice was carried out when and where she could. But when her husband died, she would have feared, and not without grounds for doing so, that her power and influence would dwindle. But in her one remaining son who survived infancy, named Athelred, she had a way to remain in power. Athelred himself had been born in around 966. He had one brother named Edmund who died young. William of Malmesbury tells of a tale that could indicate the relationship between Athelred and his mother, and also expose a great deal of character flaws in the both of them. On hearing the news of the death of his brother, Athelred was overcome with emotion, and so lengthy were his outpourings of grief that his mother Elfrida became steadily angrier and angrier until she snapped. On her son she launched a furious beating. William states that the unfortunate Athelred was beaten almost lifeless, which is probably an exaggeration, but it would certainly seem to have gone on a long time. The beating only stopped when Elfrida was eventually overcome with remorse. Elfrida, using this episode for an example, should have perhaps recognised that Athelred was not made of stern stuff, and he was certainly not made of the stuff required in a king, if that is where her thoughts lay. Whatever Elfrida made of Athelred, her desire to set him on the throne superseded any personal doubts over her son. By 978, Elfrida's stepson, Edward, had been on the throne for over 3 years. The young king seems to have thought highly of his stepmother and half-brother, but his reign was not a happy one, as minority kingships very rarely are. He had been just 13 when he became king, and soon corruption had taken over, particularly among the clergy. In short, it was the perfect environment for a coup to take place, with self-serving people running the country. And so it proved. On finishing a day of hunting, Edward was greeted by Elfrida at Corfe Castle. Desperately thirsty, Edward leaned forward and sipped from a cup. Whilst he was doing so, he was murdered by one of Elfrida's servants. Different versions are given of the murder, but to me, this is the most likely. And the villain behind it is almost certainly Elfrida herself. She, as well as Ethelred, are the ones who stood to gain the most from the removal of Edward. Edward's body was buried unceremoniously before Ethelred was declared king at about the age of 12. This murder is one of the ugliest incidents in Anglo-Saxon royal history. But Elfrida was not without her good points. She was a capable regent during her son's minority kingship, and she had also demonstrated good queenly qualities during the reign of Edgar. But the despicable murder of Edward the Martyr has tarnished her reputation forever. Perhaps the fact she spent the last decades of her life in a nunnery was a sign of remorse. But even worse than the murder of the 16-year-old Edward was the reign of Ethelred. It was a long reign of 38 years, and one of complete disaster for England, as Ethelred proved he was hopelessly out of his depth as king. We won't know what sort of king Edward the Martyr would have been, but it surely couldn't have been any worse than the reign of Ethelred II. The machinations of Elfrida put paid to any hopes of a good king in Edward the Martyr. But little to her knowledge on the usurpation and murder of Edward, she would leave a legacy that would become even worse as Ethelred's reign dragged on.